There is a point where self-awareness stops helping you and starts hollowing you out. You don't feel broken. You feel controlled, calm, detached, and that's exactly why you don't notice what you're losing. Carl Jung warned that excessive consciousness can weaken the personality instead of strengthening it. Not emotionally, structurally. You begin to watch yourself live instead of actually living. Instinct fades. Desire quiets down. Nothing pulls you forward anymore. And the most dangerous part is this. You think this state means growth. Jung didn't. He believed it was the beginning of psychological erosion. Until one day you understand yourself completely and no longer feel fully alive inside your own life. Welcome to Mind Echoes. We upload thoughtful videos every day. If you find this interesting, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let's return to the topic. Self-awareness is treated like a psychological virtue. Therapy encourages it. Philosophy celebrates it. Modern culture frames it as emotional intelligence. The more aware you are of your thoughts, emotions, and patterns, the healthier you're supposed to become. But Carl Jung did not believe self-awareness was an unlimited good. Most people misunderstand what awareness actually does inside the psyche. They assume it simply reveals what is already there. But awareness does more than reveal. It reshapes. It reorganizes. And if it grows without balance, it destabilizes the structure it is supposed to strengthen. The problem begins when awareness stops being a tool and starts becoming an identity. Instead of acting, the person watches themselves act. Instead of feeling, they analyze their feelings. Instead of responding, they monitor their response. At first, this feels like maturity. You feel less reactive, less impulsive, more composed. But over time, something else happens. The personality loses momentum. Decisions feel heavier. Emotions feel distant. Desire feels suspicious. Nothing feels fully owned. This is not depression. This is not anxiety. This is a structural weakening of the personality. Most people think the solution is more insight, more reflection, more shadow work. But Carl Jung warned that increasing consciousness without strengthening the ego leads to disintegration, not growth. Self-awareness was never meant to replace the personality. It was meant to serve it. When awareness dominates, the personality retreats. The individual becomes psychologically split, one part living, another part observing. Over time, the observer gains authority, and the lived self becomes tentative, cautious, and muted. This is why some highly self-aware people feel disconnected from life. They understand themselves deeply, yet feel strangely absent from their own experience. They can explain their emotions perfectly, but struggle to feel them fully. They know why they behave a certain way, but no longer feel compelled to behave at all. This is the problem most discussions avoid. Carl Jung explicitly warned that consciousness is not neutral. In his view, consciousness is a force that must be balanced against instinct, unconscious processes, and embodied life. When consciousness expands too far, too fast, it does not integrate the psyche, it fragments it. Jung described the ego as the center of conscious identity. But he was clear that the ego is not the whole psyche. The ego's job is to mediate between unconscious impulses and external reality. It must be strong enough to act, decide, and commit. Excessive self-awareness weakens this function. When the ego becomes overly reflective, it turns inward and begins observing itself instead of engaging with life. This creates a loop. The ego watches itself think, watches itself feel, watches itself hesitate. Action becomes delayed. Instinct is overridden. Spontaneity disappears. Jung referred to this as a form of ego inflation, not because the ego becomes grandiose, but because it identifies with consciousness itself. The individual begins to experience themselves as the observer rather than as a living personality. This is dangerous. Jung warned that identifying with higher psychic functions prematurely, especially the self archetype, destabilizes the personality. The ego borrows authority from a larger psychological structure without having the capacity to contain it. The result is detachment, dissociation, and loss of vitality. At the same time, the shadow is affected. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the parts of the personality that are disowned or undeveloped. Shadow integration requires emotional engagement, risk, and confrontation. But excessive awareness interferes with this process. Instead of integrating the shadow, the individual explains it. Instead of expressing anger, they contextualize it. Instead of acknowledging desire, they intellectualize it. Jung warned that when consciousness dominates, the shadow does not integrate. It retreats further into the unconscious. This creates a paradox. The person becomes calmer, more controlled, more reasonable, but also less alive. Aggression, desire, and intensity disappear, not because they have been integrated, but because they have been suppressed under observation. Power dynamics also shift. A person who is overly self-aware often loses psychological authority. They hesitate. They self-correct constantly. They qualify every statement. Others sense this uncertainty instinctively. Even without knowing why, people feel less impact from someone who does not fully inhabit their own position. Jung believed that psychological strength requires partial identification, not total detachment. You must believe in your own perspective long enough to act from it. Excessive awareness dissolves this identification too quickly. The uncomfortable truth is that Carl Jung did not believe all personalities should pursue maximum consciousness. Some individuals are naturally introspective. They already lean toward reflection, abstraction, and self-observation. For these people, more awareness does not create balance. It creates fragmentation. Excessive self-awareness often functions as a defense. It protects the individual from commitment, vulnerability, and risk. If every impulse is analyzed, it never has to be acted on. If every desire is explained, it never has to be lived. Jung warned that consciousness can be used to avoid life, rather than engage with it. This is why some people feel safer observing than participating. Observation feels controlled. Participation feels exposed. Awareness becomes a psychological buffer against uncertainty. Identity also suffers. Jung emphasized that identity requires a degree of unconsciousness. You must forget alternatives to commit to a role. You must temporarily believe in your own narrative to live with force. When awareness dissolves all identification, identity weakens. This is why some highly self-aware people describe feeling like no one or just consciousness. Psychologically, this is not wholeness. It is incompletion. Jung was clear. The psyche does not aim for comfort or neutrality. It aims for wholeness. And wholeness includes contradiction, intensity, instinct, and error. Carl Jung never advocated eliminating awareness. He advocated balancing it. First, allow some experiences to remain unexamined in the moment. Jung believed that immediate interpretation can interfere with natural psychic regulation. Feel first. Reflect later. Second, notice when insight is being used to delay action. Jung warned that excessive reflection weakens the will. Awareness should clarify decisions, not postpone them indefinitely. Third, strengthen identification with chosen roles. This does not mean blind conformity. Jung emphasized the necessity of ego strength before transcendence. Identity must be inhabited before it can be questioned. Fourth, reclaim instinctive responses in small situations. Speak without rehearsing. Act without narrating. Jung believed instinct was a necessary counterweight to consciousness. Finally, Accept that not everything unconscious must be made conscious. Jung repeatedly warned against total transparency of the psyche. Some processes function best without observation. Carl Jung understood something modern psychology often forgets. A life cannot be lived entirely from the outside. Self-awareness is a light. And light, when turned inward without limit, can bleach experience of its color and weight. The goal was never to become a permanent observer of your own existence. Jung did not seek the disappearance of the ego. He sought its proper placement. If you understand everything but feel little, explain everything but commit to nothing, observe yourself more than live as yourself, this may not be growth. It may be imbalanced. Sometimes, psychological health does not come from seeing more clearly, but from allowing yourself to stop watching and act anyway, without commentary, without certainty, without analysis. Jung believed that silence has a psychological function, not ignorance, not avoidance, but space. And in that space, the personality does not dissolve. It quietly reforms.